Nobody expected it. The moment the Princess of Wales stepped into Windsor's gilded banquet hall wearing the Indian Circlet, the air froze. The room full of diplomats and royals knew. This was no ordinary jewelry choice. This was a seismic signal. A tiara, long silenced, thought to be Camilla's inevitable inheritance, had chosen a different queen. The state banquet in question was no casual affair. German dignitaries had arrived, the press were watching every detail, and the grandeur of Windsor Castle was in full, blinding display. But even amid the clink of crystal and the murmur of political small talk, the entrance of Catherine, Princess of Wales, turned every head. Not because of her gown, not because of her poise, but because of the impossible tiara perched upon her head, the Indian Circlet, a piece of royal armor, blazing with historical weight and unseen in public for 2 decades. This was no ordinary return. The tiara glinted under the lights with an almost defiant brilliance, its red spinels and diamonds forming a crescent of fire. Jewel watchers, royal analysts, even former palace aides had predicted, confidently, that when the Indian Circlet reappeared, it would be on the head of Queen Camilla. It had long been whispered that the circlet was part of Camilla's natural inheritance, elegant, mature, and once deeply associated with Queen Elizabeth II. After all, Camilla had already claimed so many of Elizabeth's personal jewels, moving through the late Queen's collection like a silent wave of succession. The Indian Circlet, naturally, was thought to be next. It was assumed to be hers. But the assumptions were wrong, because here stood Catherine, wearing it like a declaration. And the message was unmistakable. This was not fashion. This was power, and not just inherited power, but earned power. The kind that is not given, but taken, with silence, loyalty, and unshakable public favor. In this single moment, with no word spoken and no gesture made, the Princess of Wales had stepped into a different league. She was no longer merely a consort in waiting. She was a monarch in formation, crowned not with gold, but with secrets. And perhaps most shocking of all was the aura she carried with it. Catherine did not look like the soft, modern royal the public once met at university steps. That night, under the vaults of Windsor, she appeared almost medieval, regal, sharp, like a figure from another age, one resurrected for the purpose of reclaiming something lost. Her expression gave nothing away, but the Indian Circlet gave everything. It was a crown of fire and silence, and it spoke louder than any coronation. But to understand why this moment shattered royal expectations, we must first unravel the strange and silent history of the Indian Circlet itself. The Indian Circlet is no ordinary heirloom. Designed by Prince Albert himself, destroyed by scandal, rebuilt in heartbreak, and stripped by superstition, it is a crown haunted by legacy and loss. And yet, it has endured, waiting silently in the vaults, as if waiting for the right woman. Its story begins not in a palace, but in a moment of national pride, the Great Exhibition of 1851. A triumph of Victorian ambition, it showcased the treasures of an empire and the ingenuity of an age. Prince Albert, the ever-curious consort, emerged from this spectacle inspired, not by dominance, but by design. He envisioned a piece for his queen, something that could embody their love of progress and their fascination with the far reaches of the empire. What he created was unlike anything else in the royal vault. A circlet of Mughal-inspired arches, dotted with fiery opals and diamonds, rich in Eastern flair and symbolic of Britain's imperial gaze turned inward, toward mysticism and exoticism. For Queen Victoria, it was not just a tiara. It was a bridge between East and West, a crown of curiosity, intellect, and control. But barely a decade later, that bridge collapsed. In 1858, following a bitter legal battle with the House of Hanover, Victoria was forced to surrender a significant cache of crown jewels, gems that had long been considered hers by right. Among them were many of the diamonds that adorned the Indian Circlet. The lawsuit didn't just strip her jewels, it stripped her dignity. The circlet, left bare, became a wound. And yet, it was not discarded. It was quietly rebuilt, not with the original opals Albert intended, but eventually, after his death, transformed under superstition. Queen Alexandra, Victoria's daughter-in-law, was said to believe that opals brought bad luck. In an era where death clung too close and scandals destroyed entire houses, such beliefs weren't dismissed. They were acted upon. The opals were removed. Rubies were inserted. Fire had replaced moonlight. Passion had replaced mystery. That transformation gave the circlet new meaning. No longer a tribute to the intellectual romance of Albert and Victoria, it became something fiercer, an emblem of resilience, of surviving spite and sorrow. The Queen Mother would later cling to it in her widowhood, wearing it not as ornament, but as armor. Her loyalty to the tiara was whispered about among courtiers, as if she believed that wearing it somehow kept her connection to the past intact, holding off the creeping uncertainties of modernity. When her daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, inherited the crown, she too seemed to understand its strange aura. But Elizabeth was careful, very careful. The Indian Circlet appeared publicly only once in her reign, in Malta, 2005, when she wore it in a subtle gesture during a visit loaded with personal memories. Then, silence. 2 decades passed. Not a single glimpse. Not a single hint. It was as if the circlet had vanished. But what if that silence wasn't neglect, but strategic? What if this tiara was being preserved for a moment far more significant than a queen's memory? She wasn't supposed to wear it. Not yet. Not while the queen consort still breathes. But Catherine didn't just borrow a crown. She stepped into a role the monarchy hadn't yet publicly assigned her. In one evening, she was no longer the princess in waiting. She was the monarch in shadow. The effect was immediate. There she stood, draped in icy blue, cool, composed, impossible to ignore. Her hair fell in soft waves, loose and modern, a silent rejection of the tight, lacquered traditions that came before. And then there was the tiara, sitting high, boldly on her head. Not tucked back, not softened by protocol or precedent. No, it was placed like a crown. With the Indian circlet blazing above her brow, Catherine was not merely dressed for diplomacy. She was making history. And she knew it. There were rules, of course. Unspoken, but deeply entrenched. Senior royal women, especially those not yet crowned, traditionally wore their tiaras with reserved precision. Hair tied back, formality intact, symbolism controlled. But Catherine bent those rules without breaking them. And in doing so, she redefined the entire conversation. Her look wasn't just elegant, it was strategic. The tiara's eastern arches met the cold shimmer of Queen Elizabeth II's diamond chandelier earrings, 2 pieces from different lifetimes, now fused into one calculated message. She wasn't just invoking heritage, she was claiming continuity. A queen in waiting who no longer needed to wait. And that pairing, Prince Albert's visionary design and Elizabeth's loyal sparkle, spoke louder than any speech. 2 royal men, generations apart, had gifted their queens with symbols of power and unity. And now, a third woman had stepped into that lineage, not by coronation, but by command of presence. There was defiance in her softness, power in her poise. And while the monarchy didn't declare it, Catherine's ensemble did. She was no longer merely accompanying the crown. She was beginning to wear it, in all but name. The public felt it instantly. Social media lit up with awe and speculation. The press, caught off guard, scrambled to define the moment. Was it a subtle rebellion? A coded signal of transition? Or was it simply the most powerful woman in the firm signaling that she knew exactly who she was and what she was becoming? The reactions were split, but the impact was not. For those watching closely, Catherine had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And once crossed, it changed everything. Yet, while all eyes were fixed on Catherine's dazzling coup, another woman, older, quieter, was crafting a very different kind of statement. Don't be fooled. While Catherine stole the spectacle, Queen Camilla orchestrated her own silent masterstroke. If the princess wore history to signal change, Camilla reassembled it to assert control. Emeralds were rearranged. Tiaras were chosen with surgical precision. This wasn't submission. It was a statement of survival. Camilla did not step into Windsor looking to outshine. She didn't need to. Her weapon was legacy, wielded, not worn. The girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara rested on her head like a crown already consecrated. It was no coincidence. This was Queen Elizabeth II's most beloved diadem, the one etched into stamps, carved onto coins, printed onto the currency of empire. Camilla didn't just borrow a tiara. She placed herself, quietly but irrevocably, in the realm of permanence. Where Catherine reached forward, Camilla pulled the past to her side and claimed it as armor. But her choices weren't just backward-looking. They were surgical, calculated, and they carried the weight of message over tradition. Around her neck sat the Greville emerald necklace, except it wasn't. The once lavish bib dripping with green pendants had been stripped back, reconstructed into an Art Deco collar. Decades of grandeur reimagined into sleek, sharpened lines. It was still regal, but colder now, controlled. A visual reminder that Camilla's power did not come from pageantry. It came from adaptation, from enduring scandal, bending history to her shape, and surviving the unforgivable. She no longer needed to dazzle. She needed to last. Her earrings were modern, diamond drops that belonged not to the Queen Mother, nor to Elizabeth, nor to the vaults. They were hers, Camilla's, personal, defiant. In a world of inherited power, she inserted her own story without apology. And yet, in the same breath, she paid homage. The Cartier Art Deco bracelets stacked along her wrist were the Queen Mother's favorite style, stacked deliberately, almost symbolically. She was walking a razor's edge, between reverence and rewriting, between tradition and transformation. And then came the brooch, a simple diamond bar, Queen Victoria's, not flashy, not headline-grabbing, but deliberate. A nod to the crown's oldest matriarch, and more importantly, a signal of duty. This was not about beauty. It was about function. Camilla wore that bar like a commandment. I am here because I did not fall, because I waited, because I endured. And now, I hold the line. In that one evening, Camilla and Catherine stood like mirrored flames, one cold, one rising, one rooted, one reaching. It wasn't a battle. It was a balancing act, a dynasty reshaping itself in real time through jewels, silences, and unspoken declarations. But this wasn't just a tale of two queens. Behind them, 3 other royal women unleashed a surge of long-silenced royal artifacts, whispers of past queens roaring back to life. They had been locked away, displayed in museums, hidden behind velvet ropes and bulletproof glass. But that night, the vaults cracked open. Tiaras thought too fragile, too old, or too sacred for use were suddenly reborn. The royal women were not just dressing up, they were resurrecting lost power. It began with Princess Anne, known for her restraint, her unwavering sense of duty, and her refusal to perform for spectacle. Anne made a decision that silenced even the most hardened critics. On her head sat the aquamarine pine flower tiara, delicate, glacial, and saturated with unspoken history. Commissioned in 1938 for a young Princess Elizabeth by her parents, the tiara was meant to symbolize something rare and enduring. The pine flower, emblem of resilience, longevity, and unwavering strength. But for Anne, it meant more than just symbolism. It was personal. The central motif of the tiara had once been gifted to her as a brooch on her wedding day. She had worn it through love, motherhood, royal crises, and global duty. Now, reassembled in its original form, it crowned a woman who had survived the weight of monarchy longer than any woman in that hall. She didn't need applause. Her silence spoke for her. And then came the Duchess of Gloucester, often overlooked, often underestimated. But not that night. She emerged with the Cartier India tiara, an astonishing explosion of Mughal-inspired artistry, once deemed too heavy, too ornate, even for royal appearances. But its presence was no accident. It was a nod to empire, yes, but also a reminder of the scale of royal inheritance. Jewels, not just of England, but of centuries spanning dominion. Her necklace and earrings, inherited from Queen Victoria herself, were layered not for beauty, but for memory. In her quiet dignity, she reminded the world that the royal family was not just alive. It was ancient, surviving, enduring. Together, Anne and the Duchess didn't clamor for headlines, but their jewelry did. These weren't accessories. These were relics with intent. When the monarchy is questioned, it does not scream. It reminds. Through jewels, through gestures, through the unearthing of what was once buried. The very act of wearing these pieces was a defiant reclaiming, ancestral gravitas reborn in the face of modern scrutiny. In a room electrified by power plays and succession whispers, these women offered something older, something heavier. Not just royalty, but roots. And yet, in the shadow of these legendary jewels, one woman's jewelry sparked more controversy than admiration. Every royal jewel tells a story. But what happens when the stories clash? The Duchess of Edinburgh's sapphire and aquamarine pairing sent shock waves through royal watchers. Was it a misstep, a rebellion, or a silent cry for access to the deeper vaults of power? Sophie has always walked the line between duty and invisibility. She has been steady, discreet, endlessly loyal. But that night, her choice in jewels raised questions no one could ignore. On her head, she wore the light, clean lines of a modern G. Collins aquamarine necklace, fashioned into a tiara. It was elegant, almost minimalist, but around her neck shimmered a dramatically deep sapphire necklace, new, bold, unmistakably expensive. Designed by Graf, its electric blue fire nearly consumed the softer green tones of her tiara. The two pieces clashed, not in beauty, but in message. They told different stories. And in that clash, a deeper tension emerged. Because Sophie, for all her poise and unwavering presence, remains outside the inner circle of inheritance. While others wore relics soaked in monarchy and memory, Sophie wore pieces that, though exquisite, lacked history. One was a modern fabrication, the other a luxury gift. Together, they radiated wealth, but not legacy. To some, it was a rare misstep in presentation. To others, it was a subtle act of protest, a statement not of rebellion, but of absence, of the pieces she didn't wear, of the tiaras she didn't have access to, of the vaults that, for her, still remained locked. The emotional contrast was even more jarring. Surrounded by women clad in ancestral diamonds and ghost-laden gems, Sophie's look felt startlingly contemporary. Hers was the glamour of the elite, not the divine. It wasn't borrowed from empire or crafted by mourning kings. It was crafted by commerce. Beautiful, yes, but detached from crown and ceremony. And that detachment spoke volumes. Royal watchers began to ask what many had long suspected. Why hasn't Sophie, one of the monarchy's most loyal and scandal-free figures, been granted fuller access to the historic collection? Is her discretion a strength or a shield that's kept her from ascending into symbolic power? Among all the royal women, she carries a potential unique to the new monarchy. A steady anchor without drama, without noise. But jewelry is never just jewelry. And if the monarchy's message is told through stones, then Sophie's was missing something. Not brilliance, but weight, ancestry, power, and above all, permission. But if the women's jewels were speaking in veiled sentences, the men of the monarchy remained ominously silent. Except for one silent gesture, the king's hand that unlocked the vault. He never said a word. Yet the signal was thunderous. Only the king can release certain heirlooms. Only the king can grant permission to wear what once belonged to queens of old. And in choosing to hand Catherine the Indian Circlet, Charles made a decision that cannot be undone. Because in the royal hierarchy, jewels are not just possessions, they are instruments of power. And their access is guarded with absolute control. There are pieces in the royal collection so sacred, so tightly entwined with monarchy itself, that no one may touch them without the sovereign's direct blessing. The Indian Circlet is one of those pieces. For decades, it had been kept from public view, suspended in silence, protected like a relic. Its release was no accident. No stylist made that call, no aide dared suggest it. The order came from the very top, and it was Charles's hand that turned the lock. But what made this gesture so striking was not just what it gave Catherine, but what it denied Camilla. The Indian Circlet, tied intimately to the Queen Mother and long thought destined for Camilla, bypassed her entirely. This wasn't a matter of taste. It was a dynastic recalibration. By placing that tiara on Catherine, Charles shifted the visual center of monarchy away from his consort and toward his heir's wife. And in doing so, he rewrote the presentational map of the crown. Not with a press release, not with a coronation, but with a jewel. There was nothing random about it. The circlet is a Queen Mother piece, a legacy tiara, weighted with public memory and ancestral expectation. Granting it to Catherine, in full view of foreign dignitaries, was a clear move to establish her not just as a princess, but as the monarchy's next queen in practice. It aligned her, visually and emotionally, with Elizabeth II. It was a transfer of tone, of image, of symbolism, and it happened quietly, almost invisibly. But the impact was irreversible. And what of the emotional consequences? For Camilla, it marked a subtle curtailing of her symbolic domain. For Catherine, it marked a dangerous elevation. And for Charles, it revealed something far deeper than preference. It revealed strategy. Because Charles, more than anyone, knows the cost of public sentiment. He has lived through its whiplash. And now, with the weight of the crown fully upon him, he appears to be steering his legacy toward the one figure who can stabilize the institution's future. not by title, but by presence, by image, by silence, made spectacle. And therein lies the tragedy, the brilliance, and the danger. In a monarchy that now survives on symbolism more than sovereignty, this was not just a choice of jewels, it was a coronation in code. And while no one heard the words, everyone understood them. But beyond the king's silent orchestration lies something even more startling: the revival of the crown's most dangerous language. In monarchies, words are rare. Appearances deceive. But jewelry? Jewelry is war. The return of the Indian Circlet has reignited an old tradition, using jewels to make statements louder than politics. Welcome to the jewelry code of the crown, where nothing is ever random, and every sparkle is a strike. For centuries, royal jewels have done what speeches couldn't. They've calmed tempers, challenged rivals, and drawn battle lines, all without a single syllable. From the Tudor pearls that once proclaimed survival to Queen Victoria's black jet mourning jewels that turned grief into monarchy, this is a language long mastered by women born or married into power. Now, in the 21st century, that language has returned, with razor-sharp precision. At the heart of it, Camilla and Catherine. The battle of brooches, tiaras, and earrings may seem superficial, but within the firm, presentation is politics. And nothing exposed this more than the moment Catherine paired a historic sapphire earring, a known favorite of Princess Diana, with the Indian Circlet. The message was striking. Diana's memory, long a painful wedge between Charles and the public, was no longer being softened. It was being reclaimed, reframed, worn, not as a wound, but as a weapon. Camilla, by contrast, responded not with nostalgia, but reinvention. Her reset of the Greville Emerald Suite was her own kind of defiance. Stripping away the traditional pendants, she converted history into modern elegance. It was as if she refused to be defined by what came before. Where Catherine leaned into royal memory, Camilla detached from it, crafting a visual narrative that said, "I am here because I endured, not because I was chosen." Then came the moment that nearly broke the code. Camilla's use of costume-style pieces placed against a backdrop of crown heirlooms was seen by many as jarring, if not pointed. It signaled a wider debate inside the palace and far beyond. Who gets access to history, and who is left borrowing from the outside? Was this a quiet protest? A reminder that even queens can find vault doors closed to them? Or was it an assertion that personal taste, even when unconventional, trumps royal conformity? The tiaras, the brooches, the earrings, all of it, repurposed into a silent war of emotion. A struggle not for titles, but for legacy, for representation, for memory. The girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, worn by Camilla and once synonymous with Elizabeth II, wasn't just decorative. It was nostalgic currency, and by placing it on her head, Camilla planted herself firmly in the late Queen's silhouette, declaring that while Catherine may represent the future, she would hold the past. But make no mistake, the emotional tug-of-war over royal symbolism has only intensified. Because at the center of it all lies the oldest question in monarchy: who owns the legacy, and who dares to wear it? And yet, this drama was only the beginning. Because the real question isn't what was worn, but what comes next. This wasn't about beauty. It was about power. By wearing the Indian Circlet, Catherine didn't just borrow history. She claimed it. And in doing so, she reopened the greatest question of all. Who is the future of the monarchy? And what will she choose to wear next? Because the weight of that tiara was never measured in diamonds alone. It carried the memory of the Queen Mother, of endurance through war, of quiet authority earned in the shadows, of a woman who understood that survival itself could become a form of rule. To place that circlet on Catherine's head was to collapse generations into a single moment. Past and future pressed together. Continuity meeting inevitability. And the symbolism was unmistakable. This was not nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. This was inheritance, unfolding in real time. Where Camilla represented stability, carefully curated, firmly anchored to Elizabeth II's image, Catherine represented something more dangerous. Momentum. A future that does not ask permission. A future already adored by the public, already fluent in the monarchy's unspoken language. The contrast was sharp but deliberate. One woman holding the line, the other stepping beyond it. And the Indian Circlet became the bridge between them, carrying the monarchy forward without ever admitting that it had moved. The public felt it instantly. Enthusiasm surged, laced with surprise and longing. For some, it awakened memories of the Queen Mother's strength. For others, it recalled Diana's unfinished story. Her absence suddenly reframed through Catherine's presence. There was nostalgia, yes, but also relief. A sense that the monarchy, so often accused of stagnation, had quietly chosen renewal. Not through reform, not through words, but through a single, devastatingly effective symbol. And once that symbol appeared, the questions multiplied. If the Indian Circlet could return, what else had been waiting? Which long-lost jewels, sealed away by caution or controversy, might now be deemed ready for daylight? The vault doors, once rigidly controlled, no longer felt impenetrable. They felt unlocked. And with that came anticipation. Because every jewel carries a story, and some stories, once released, cannot be silenced again. The monarchy has always understood this truth. Crowns are not seized, they are signaled. Power is not announced, it is revealed. And on that night, Catherine did not speak, did not gesture, did not declare anything at all. She simply wore what had been withheld for decades. And that was enough. As the chandeliers dim and the echoes of the tiaras fade, one thing is clear: the Indian Circlet did not just return. It declared a new queen in waiting.